Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The Night Call.
The nights here are usually so quiet. That's what I love about this place. Its stillness, the way the darkness wraps around the house like a blanket, cocooning me from the world outside. I moved to this small town in the middle of nowhere to escape the chaos of the city, and most days, I feel like I made the right choice. But sometimes, just sometimes, the silence feels too thick, too heavy. It's during those moments that the solitude creeps in, making the shadows in the corners of my home seem darker, the creaks of the house more ominous. Last night was one of those nights. I had gone to bed earlier than usual, hoping to lose myself in sleep, to escape the unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest. I was drifting in and out of dreams when the shrill ring of the phone jolted me awake. My heart raced as I fumbled for the receiver in the dark, the sudden sound shattering the silence of the house. The clock on the nightstand read 2:13 a.m. Who could be calling at this hour? The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the grogginess of sleep and the late hour made me think it might be an emergency. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my voice thick with sleep. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Then, a man's voice, smooth, calm, almost too controlled, broke through the quiet. "I'm watching you." I felt a chill run down my spine. The words were simple, but there was something about the way he said them, something cold and detached. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a prank. After all, who would seriously call in the middle of the night to say something like that? "Very funny," I said, trying to sound annoyed rather than scared. "Who is this?" He didn't answer. Instead, there was a soft chuckle, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a moment, the receiver still pressed against my ear, listening to the dial tone. It had to be some kind of joke, maybe a wrong number. With a sigh, I hung up and lay back down, telling myself it was nothing. But the uneasy feeling gnawed at me, refusing to let go. Just as I was beginning to calm down, the phone rang again. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, I hesitated before answering, dread pooling in my stomach. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The same voice, the same eerie calmness. "You're sitting up now, aren't you? Your hands are gripping the sheets so tightly. And that blue nightgown you're wearing, it really brings out the color of your eyes." My blood ran cold. There was no way he could know that. I glanced toward the window, the curtains drawn but thin, the faint outline of the street lamp outside barely visible through the fabric. "And that window," he continued, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "You might want to close it." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The voice on the other end continued, calmly describing every detail of my surroundings, as if he were standing right beside me. I struggled to steady my breathing, but the panic was clawing at my insides, making it hard to think straight. I forced myself to move, to do something, anything. My hands were trembling as I reached for the lamp on the bedside table. The light flickered for a moment before it came on, casting a warm glow over the room. But it did nothing to dispel the icy fear gripping me. I pulled the curtains shut, fumbling with the fabric, but the sensation of being watched only grew stronger. He couldn't really be out there, I told myself. This has to be some kind of sick joke. But the words felt hollow, like I was trying to convince myself of a lie. I needed to call the police. That was the logical thing to do. But when I picked up the phone, the line was dead. No dial tone, nothing. Just a hollow, oppressive silence. A new wave of panic surged through me as I quickly grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand, my fingers fumbling to unlock it. No signal. Not a single bar. It was as if the house, my sanctuary, had suddenly turned against me. The walls seemed to close in, the familiar corners of each room now filled with hidden threats. The isolation I once cherished had transformed into a suffocating trap. My mind raced, searching for explanations. Maybe it was just a temporary outage. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't normal. This was deliberate. I moved to the window, my hand hesitating on the curtain. Part of me didn't want to look, didn't want to see what might be out there. But I had to know. I had to see for myself. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The street was dark, the faint glow of the street lamp casting long shadows across the yard. At first, I saw nothing, just the quiet street and the occasional sway of tree branches in the wind. Then, I saw it. A shadow, shifting at the edge of the yard, near the tree line. It was too far away to make out any details, but it was there, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. The phone in my hand buzzed, startling me. I nearly dropped it, but managed to hold on, my fingers gripping it like a lifeline. The screen lit up with a new message. My heart sank as I read the words, my blood turning to ice. I'm more than just a shadow. I'm closer than you think. Panic was now my constant companion. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house, but my feet seemed rooted to the floor. I couldn't just leave without knowing what was happening. I had to find out where that voice was coming from, who was tormenting me in the dead of night. I started moving through the house, my movements frantic and disjointed. The living room, the kitchen, the small study. I checked every corner, every window, searching for some sign that someone had been here, that someone had broken in. But everything seemed normal, just as I had left it. The silence in the house was oppressive, only broken by the rapid beat of my heart echoing in my ears. The more I searched, the more I began to doubt myself. Was I imagining all of this? Could it all be some twisted hallucination brought on by stress and isolation? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that was clouding my thoughts. No, this was real. It had to be. But then I started noticing the little things. The kitchen window, slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had locked it earlier. A chair in the dining room, pulled out from the table just enough to be off-kilter, when I distinctly remembered pushing it in. And then there was the shoe, one of my own, lying on its side near the front door. I always lined them up neatly, a habit ingrained in me, but now one was out of place, like someone had carelessly kicked it aside. A cold realization began to settle in. Someone had been in my house, and they had been careful to leave only the faintest traces, just enough to make me question my sanity. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over, threatening to consume me. I returned to the bedroom, my hands shaking as I grabbed the phone. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to trace those calls, to figure out where they were coming from. My fingers flew over the buttons, pulling up the call history. What I saw made my blood run cold. The calls hadn't come from outside. They hadn't been made to my phone from some distant, unknown number. Instead, they were listed as internal calls, originating from a device within the house itself. An extension I didn't even know existed. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. There was another phone line in the house, one I had never used, one I had never even known about. And as I stood there, frozen in disbelief, the phone in my hand began to ring again. But this time, it wasn't the phone I was holding. The sound was coming from somewhere downstairs, a low, insistent ring that echoed through the silent halls. Someone was in the house. Someone who knew every inch of it, every dark corner. And they were calling me from just below my feet. The ringing echoed through the house, each chime like a jolt to my already frayed nerves. I knew I had to go downstairs, had to follow the sound, even though every instinct screamed at me to lock myself in my room and wait for it to stop. But I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. I moved slowly, my steps hesitant as I descended the staircase. The house seemed different now, unfamiliar and hostile. The shadows stretched longer, the creaks in the floorboards more pronounced. The air was thick with tension, and with every step, the ringing grew louder, more insistent. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused, straining to locate the source of the sound. It was coming from one of the back rooms, a place I rarely had reason to enter. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Why would the call be coming from there? Who, or what, was in my house? The ringing became clearer as I approached the room. It was no longer just a sound. There was something else mixed in, something that made my skin crawl. A voice, low and distorted, as if the person on the other end was not just speaking through the phone but was somehow closer, inside the house. The thought made my stomach turn. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. And there, on a side table, was an ancient rotary phone, its black surface dull with age, the cord frayed and trailing on the floor. It shouldn't have been ringing. It shouldn't have even been functional, especially with the cord visibly cut. Yet it rang. With a deep breath, I forced myself to cross the room, each step heavier than the last. My mind was racing, searching for any logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The closer I got, the louder the voice became, until I could almost make out words. Finally, I stood in front of the phone, its ringing so loud it seemed to vibrate through the air. With a shaking hand, I picked up the receiver, my breath hitching in my throat. The voice on the other end was clear now, chillingly calm. "I'm here," it whispered. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, the receiver clattering against the table before swinging from the cut cord. My pulse was racing, fear tightening my chest, but there was no time to think, no time to rationalize. I had to move, had to do something. But then I heard it, a sound that sent every hair on my body standing on end. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, coming from just outside the room. They grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the door. I turned, heart pounding in my ears, as the door slowly began to creak open. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint outline of a figure standing in the doorway. Indistinct, shrouded in shadow, but undeniably there. And I was trapped, the only exit blocked by whatever was lurking in the dark. I bolted up the stairs, my legs moving on sheer instinct, driven by the overwhelming need to escape. The walls seemed to close in around me as I raced back to the safety of my bedroom. Slamming the door behind me, I twisted the lock with trembling fingers, backing away until I hit the bed. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart thudding wildly in my chest. I was alone, or at least I hoped I was. But the house was alive with sound, faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, footsteps echoing from the rooms below. It was as if the very structure of the house was conspiring against me, suffocating me in its eerie embrace. I reached for my cell phone, desperate for a connection to the outside world. When I saw that I finally had a signal, a fleeting sense of relief washed over me. My fingers fumbled to dial 911, but before I could complete the number, a notification flashed on the screen, a text message from an unknown number. "You can't escape." The words on the screen felt like a punch to the gut. The phone slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor as the reality of my situation sank in. I was trapped. No matter where I turned, there was no way out. My only option was to confront whatever was coming for me. A slow, deliberate knock echoed from the other side of the door, the sound reverberating through the silence. The wood creaked under the pressure, the lock straining as the force behind it grew stronger with each impact. The door was beginning to give way, and with it, the last of my resolve. I scanned the room for anything I could use to defend myself, my eyes landing on a heavy lamp on the bedside table. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I grabbed it, clutching it tightly in both hands as I braced myself for what was about to come through that door. The knocking stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that was somehow even worse. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into eternity. And then, with a final splintering crack, the door swung open. I didn't wait to see who, or what, was there. I swung the lamp with all my strength, letting out a cry of fear and anger. But the lamp hit nothing but empty air, sending me stumbling forward into the darkened hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, my heart pounding in my ears. There was nothing. No figure in the doorway, no shadow lurking in the hall. Just the empty, oppressive silence that filled the house. I stood there, my grip on the lamp loosening as the reality of the situation hit me. I was alone, yet the terror that clung to me was as real as the blood pounding in my veins. The lamp slipped from my hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud. I sank to the ground, my back against the wall, and picked up my phone again. The screen was cracked, but the notification light was blinking, signaling a new message. My hands shook as I unlocked it, a deep sense of dread filling me. And then the phone rang, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the silence like a knife. I answered it without thinking, my breath catching in my throat as I pressed the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was calm, almost soothing. "I'm still here." The line went dead, leaving me in the dark, clutching the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. But the truth was, I no longer knew what was real. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all-consuming, and as I sat there in the oppressive silence, one thing was certain. I was not alone.
The sound on the wall.
I had just moved into my new apartment, a small, affordable place in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but at this point in my life, it was all I needed. The building had its quirks, the floors creaked with every step, and the walls were thin enough that I could sometimes hear my neighbors moving about. But there was a certain charm to it, an old-world feel that made it seem like it had a story to tell. That first night, I was exhausted from the move. I fell into bed, hoping for a good night's sleep in my new home. But as I began to drift off, I was pulled from sleep by a faint sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the remnants of a dream still clinging to my mind. But there it was again, a light scratching noise, like nails on wood, coming from the wall right next to my bed. I sat up, straining to hear. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. My first thought was that it was a mouse, or maybe just the building settling. Old places like this made all kinds of noises. I tried to ignore it, rolling over and pulling the covers up to my chin. But as I closed my eyes, the sound changed. What had been scratching turned into something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It was so soft that I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was as if someone was standing right on the other side of the wall, speaking just loud enough for me to hear, but not to understand. I lay there, heart pounding, wondering if I was truly alone in my new apartment. The next few nights were anything but restful. The noises that had started as a faint scratching became impossible to ignore. Every evening, as soon as I'd lie down, they would begin. First a light tapping, like someone gently rapping their fingers against the wall, then the whispers, growing louder with each passing night. It was as if someone was standing just on the other side, trying to speak to me but never quite loud enough for me to understand. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it had to be something mundane. Maybe it was the pipes rattling, or perhaps my neighbors were just up late at night, moving things around. But the explanations didn't quite fit. The taps were too deliberate, the whispers too human to be dismissed so easily. My days became a blur of exhaustion. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the wall, listening intently. Sometimes the sounds would stop altogether, giving me just enough hope that it was over, only for them to start up again with renewed intensity. The unease that settled in my gut grew stronger with each sleepless night. I began to dread going to bed, knowing that as soon as I closed my eyes, the noises would start again. It felt as though the apartment was coming alive at night, that something in those walls wanted my attention. Then, one night, fed up and desperate for sleep, I did something I'd never done before. As the tapping started up again, I leaned over and knocked on the wall. It was meant to be a simple gesture, a way of telling whoever, or whatever, was making the noise to stop. But the moment my knuckles met the plaster, I heard it, a distinct, deliberate knock, echoing mine exactly, coming from the other side. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I knocked again, this time with a trembling hand. The response was immediate, another knock, perfectly synchronized with mine. I wasn't alone. Determined to get to the bottom of the noises, I decided to investigate more thoroughly. The next day, I spoke with my neighbors, hoping they might have noticed something. But when I asked, they looked at me with blank faces and shrugged it off. "Old building," one of them said. "You know how it is." They all assured me that the walls were too thick for any sounds to travel between units, which only deepened my frustration. Unable to ignore the growing fear, I resolved to inspect the wall myself. That night, with a flashlight in hand, I pressed my ear against the wall where the noises had been most intense. It felt as if something was trying to break through from the other side. The tapping and whispers had become a constant presence, gnawing at my sanity. I scrutinized the wall closely, and something caught my eye, a small area where the paint seemed oddly bubbled. It was subtle but noticeable, as though the surface had been recently disturbed. My heart pounded as I reached for a knife and began peeling away the paint, each strip revealing more of the underlying surface. As I continued, a chill ran down my spine. The wall didn't just end, it revealed a solid old door, its edges caked with dust and grime. The door had clearly been sealed up for a long time. I stood there, staring at it, feeling a mixture of dread and curiosity. Just as I reached for the doorknob, the scratching and whispering grew deafening. The sounds intensified, filling the room with an oppressive, frantic energy. My hands shook as I hesitated, the fear of what lay beyond the door clawing at me. The noises seemed to be screaming at me, begging me not to open it, but I knew I had to see for myself. With my heart racing, I took a deep breath and grasped the doorknob, bracing myself for whatever lay on the other side. I forced myself to push open the old, sealed door, the hinges groaning in protest. As it creaked ajar, a thick cloud of dust billowed out, making me cough. I shone my flashlight into the darkness beyond, revealing a small, forgotten room. The air was musty and heavy, thick with neglect. The only thing inside was an old, rotting wooden chair, positioned in the center of the room as if waiting for someone, or something, to sit in it. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing eerily in the confined space. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I spun around, but the door was now solid and unmoving, locked from the outside. Panic surged through me. The scratching noise returned, but it was no longer coming from a single spot. It surrounded me, emanating from the walls themselves, as if the room was alive and crawling with unseen creatures. The whispers grew louder, clearer, their tone almost soothing in their persistence. They were speaking directly to me now, calling my name, urging me to stay, to remain with them. I could barely breathe, my mind racing as I tried to comprehend what was happening. The whispers grew more insistent, their voices blending into a chilling chorus. They seemed to know everything about me, each whisper a personal taunt. Then the whispers revealed a horrifying truth. "You're not the first," they said in unison. "Others have come before you. None have ever left." The realization hit me like a cold wave. I wasn't alone in this room, nor was I the first to have ventured here. The terror that gripped me was almost paralyzing. I stood there, immobilized by fear, as the walls seemed to close in around me. The whispers continued their eerie chant, and the scratching grew louder, more frenzied. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could only imagine the fate of those who had been trapped here before me. The air in the room grew colder, and the walls seemed to pulse and bleed with a dark, oozing substance. The ghostly figures began to emerge from the walls, their faces contorted in expressions of unspeakable agony. They reached out towards me with spectral hands, their eyes hollow and pleading. I recognized them instantly, the souls of those who had come before me, trapped and consumed by the malevolent force that seemed to control this place. My grip on reality was slipping as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. They echoed through my mind, a cacophony of despair and torment. I could feel my sanity fraying, each whisper a reminder of the suffering that had occurred in this room. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I clawed desperately at the door, my fingers scrabbling against the surface, trying to force it open. The door felt like it was mocking me, resisting my efforts with an almost sentient force. I could barely keep track of time, my sense of reality slipping away as the room seemed to close in on me. Just when I thought I would lose my mind, I heard a sudden, sharp crack. The door burst open with a resounding bang, and I stumbled backward into my bedroom, gasping for air. The noises stopped instantly. The oppressive silence was deafening, the apartment now eerily calm. I looked around, disoriented, and saw that everything was just as I had left it. I had escaped the room, but the terror of what I had seen lingered in my mind. I packed my belongings with trembling hands, my resolve to leave this place stronger than ever. But as I was about to leave, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper behind me. The chilling reminder that some doors should never be opened, that some things are better left undiscovered. As I walked out of the apartment for the last time, I glanced back one final time. My blood ran cold when I noticed a fresh scratch mark on the wall next to the sealed door. It was as if something, or someone, was still trying to get out. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I turned away and left, the apartment fading into the distance.
The hallway light.
My name is Emily, and I live alone in a charming old house in City State. It's a place that feels like it has a personality all its own, creaky floors, drafty windows, and an atmosphere that seems to hold whispers from the past. It's not the kind of house you just live in. It's the kind that wraps itself around you and becomes part of your life. Every night, without fail, I follow a strict routine. It starts with me wandering through the house, making sure every single light is turned off. The old light switches have a satisfying click that I rely on to ensure no light is left on. Once that's done, I make my way to my bedroom, where I lock the door as a final precaution. I tell myself it's a small but necessary barrier against whatever might be lurking outside. There's something oddly comforting about this nightly ritual. It's like a protective shield, a routine that wards off any potential intruders, real or imagined. I know it might sound a bit paranoid, but after living in this old house for a while, I've come to rely on these small actions for my peace of mind. The house itself has an unsettling reputation. When I moved in, I heard stories from the previous owner about strange occurrences. One tale that stuck with me was about a family who had lived here before. They'd mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallways when they were certain no one else was home. They even had a story about a light that would flicker on and off without explanation, much like a signal from another realm. I'd shrugged off these stories, attributing them to old house quirks and overactive imaginations. Yet, even with my nightly rituals, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if there was something to those stories. For now, I clung to the belief that my routine was enough to keep me safe, ensuring that the darkness outside my door stayed just that, outside. I turned off the last light, locked the bedroom door, and slid into bed, wrapping myself in the comforting embrace of my blankets. As I closed my eyes, I felt a fleeting sense of peace, convinced that my routine was enough to keep the unsettling history of the house at bay. It was one of those nights when sleep was elusive, slipping away despite the comfort of my blankets. I woke suddenly, my eyes fluttering open to the faint glow of light seeping through the edges of my bedroom door. The light was eerily bright, casting a soft golden hue across the wooden floorboards and illuminating the creaky hallway outside. Confused and slightly annoyed, I sat up in bed, my heart thudding in my chest. I was sure I had turned off every light before I locked my door and settled in for the night. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and shuffled towards the door. Each step seemed to echo in the silence of the house, amplifying my unease. I opened the door and peered into the hallway, which was now bathed in a dim, unsettling light. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw the light bulb in the ceiling fixture flickering weakly. It wasn't the bright, steady beam I had seen moments ago. It was cold to the touch, its metal surface slightly chilled as if it had been off for some time. My confusion deepened. Had I imagined the light? Was it a trick of my tired eyes? I took a deep breath and turned off the switch, letting the hallway fall into complete darkness once more. The eerie silence returned, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the house settling. I went back to bed, trying to shake off the disquiet that had settled over me. My mind raced with rational explanations. Maybe I'd been dreaming, or perhaps a draft had caused the light to flicker. I told myself it was nothing more than a minor glitch, a harmless quirk of an old house. Yet, as I settled back under the covers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next night, I followed my routine with even more diligence, double-checking each light and ensuring my door was securely locked. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the unsettling memory of that light glowing in the hallway, a small beacon in the oppressive darkness. It was a fleeting thought, a seed of doubt that began to burrow into my mind, hinting at a repetition of events that I couldn't yet fully comprehend. The nights had become a relentless cycle of dread. Each evening, as soon as I slipped beneath the covers, I would hear the soft hum of the hallway light flickering to life. It was always the same. The light would glow faintly under my bedroom door, a stark contrast to the dark I had meticulously created. Each time, I'd get up to check. Every single time, the light bulb was off, cold to the touch, and the fixture itself showed no sign of having recently been in use. My attempts to rationalize it, perhaps a fault in the wiring or a trick of my exhausted mind, were growing increasingly futile. My anxiety began to seep into every corner of my life. I'd lie awake at night, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the glow that seemed to mock my attempts at normalcy. I'd check and recheck the locks, the light switches, and even the wiring, but everything appeared in order. The pattern was undeniable, though. Every night, like clockwork, the light would turn on. It wasn't just the light anymore. Other strange occurrences began to unsettle me. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when I was sure I was alone, the soft patter of steps that seemed to pause just outside my door. Cold spots would appear randomly around the house, making me shiver despite the warm temperature inside. I'd even find the occasional draft, but no window or door was left open. There were times when I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a palpable presence that seemed to hover just beyond my peripheral vision. Every shadow, every creak of the house made me jump. My mind would race, concocting wild theories and explanations, but none seemed to fit the reality of the situation. During the day, I tried to distract myself from the mounting fear. I'd busied myself with work and social outings, but the anxiety clung to me like a shadow. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, my waking hours consumed by paranoia. The house, once a refuge, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its walls closing in on me. The light's nightly ritual was more than just a nuisance. It was a harbinger of the growing unease that settled in my bones. I had begun to dread the moment I'd have to face the hallway again, knowing that with each night, the light's behavior grew more deliberate, more sinister. The old stories I had dismissed were now starting to seem frighteningly plausible, and my sanctuary had become a stage for a nightmare I couldn't escape. The nights had stretched into a ceaseless cycle of dread and sleeplessness. My nerves were frayed, and my patience had worn thin. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to confront whatever was causing the light to turn on. I resolved to stay awake, to catch whatever, or whoever, was playing this cruel game. I sat in the darkness of my room, every sense on edge. The hours dragged by as I waited, the silence of the house almost deafening. My heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The cold air of the room seemed to amplify every tiny sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustling of my sheets, the distant hum of the old house settling. Then, right on cue, the light flickered on. It was as if it had a life of its own, glowing softly under the crack of the door. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself to rise, each movement slow and deliberate. I crept to the door, trying to steady my shaking hands. The cold metal of the doorknob felt foreign, almost hostile, as I turned it with a trembling grip. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open just enough to peer into the hallway. The light illuminated the corridor, casting long, haunting shadows against the walls. The beam of light seemed to focus on a single spot in the middle of the hallway. My eyes widened as I saw it. Standing under the light was a dark figure, unmoving and silent. It was tall and shrouded in shadow, its features obscured by the dim glow. I could see nothing more than a vague, indistinct form, but its presence was unmistakable. It was as if the light itself was drawn to this figure, casting it in an eerie, otherworldly radiance. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure was facing directly towards me, even though I couldn't make out any details of its face. There was a palpable sense of malevolence in the air, a feeling that this entity knew I was watching, that it was waiting for me. The suspense was unbearable. Every instinct told me to flee, but my body felt rooted to the spot. I tried to muster the courage to step into the hallway, to confront whatever this was, but my legs felt like lead. The figure remained still, its dark form almost blending into the shadows around it, except for the eerie glow of the light that seemed to highlight its presence. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination? Or was it something more sinister, something tied to the house's dark history? The sense of dread that washed over me was almost tangible, a thick, suffocating fog that made it hard to breathe. As I stood there, paralyzed by fear, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows. The light flickered and then went out, leaving me alone in the oppressive darkness of the hallway. I was left standing in the doorway, my heart pounding. The image of that dark figure burned into my mind. The confrontation had left me shaken and more terrified than ever. I had faced the unknown, and it had revealed itself to be even more disturbing than I could have imagined. The figure's presence was a chilling confirmation that something was very wrong in my house, something I had yet to fully understand. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the dark figure vanished. The light flickered once more and then went out, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. I stood in the dark hallway, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. I went back to my room, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the encounter over and over, trying to make sense of the figure's appearance and disappearance. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in with a sense of impending doom. The next day, I decided I had to know more. I spent hours scouring old records and speaking with neighbors about the house's history. What I found was unsettling. The house had a dark and tragic past, with multiple previous occupants reporting similar experiences: strange lights, eerie noises, and ghostly apparitions. I discovered that the house had once belonged to a family who had mysteriously disappeared. Neighbors reported that the family had been troubled, claiming they were haunted by a presence they could never fully describe. Others spoke of a light that would turn on by itself, casting an unnatural glow across the hallway. Their disappearance was never solved, and the house had remained a source of dark whispers and unanswered questions. As I pieced together the fragments of the house's history, I began to understand that the figure I had seen was more than just a trick of the light or my imagination. It was a manifestation tied to the house's grim past. The light, it seemed, was not merely a malfunction but a part of a pattern that had plagued the house for decades. The realization left me with a chilling sense of dread. The entity was not just a lingering shadow but a part of the house's malevolent legacy. It was watching me, waiting for something, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, the sense of being observed remained unshakable. As night fell, I sat in my room, every creak of the house amplifying my anxiety. The light in the hallway remained off, but the darkness felt heavier, charged with an oppressive presence. I tried to convince myself that I had done everything I could to understand and confront the entity, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of the house's dark history. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers. The house had revealed its sinister side, and I was left grappling with the knowledge that the entity, whatever it was still out there, hidden in the shadows. My home, once a place of comfort, was now a source of endless fear, and I could no longer ignore the unsettling truth. The entity was still watching, and my sanctuary was far from safe.